name's Dave Campbell. I'm with FirstNet, and today we're talking to Kieran Frost from Sendmarc. We're going to talk around the DMARC problem and what DMARC is and how we help solve that problem with Sendmarc. Hi, Kieran. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, and you, Dave. And excited to share some of this content with the team. You happy for me to just jump straight into it?
Yeah, I think maybe let's just talk about why FirstNet is approaching customers and making them aware of DMARC. As a cloud service provider, we host a lot of websites and domains, and I think it's important we make our customers aware of DMARC and what it is, what the problem is, and how DMARC and reporting on DMARC helps. And that's why I've invited you today. So yes, let's bring up the presentation. Let's have a chat around it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we're very excited to be working with FirstNet, and we think that by solving this problem for customers, we're actually solving a problem that affects everyone. So let's talk a little bit about that problem. So when it comes to email and how organizations consume email, there are a number of problems that we see in the market, right? Far and away the biggest one, the one that our customers talk to us about, the one that affects their customers most acutely, is impersonation. And this is really just the idea that it's very simple to send a mail that looks like it comes from somebody else to anybody in the world, right? We'll talk about why or what kind of activities cybercrime criminals get up to. But impersonation attacks, because it's so easy to pull off, is the leading vector for cybercrime. So about quarters of cybercrime starts with these impersonation attacks, and they can be significantly costly. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So over and above impersonation, and I think interception, goes hand in hand with that sort of discussion. Delivery, very much speaks for itself. The second biggest problem that we see is just a general lack of visibility and audit. And the reason for this is, often when we talk to customers, there'll be a single person, usually the IT department, responsible for their everyday email infrastructure, be it, an Exchange environment or Office 365 or Google Workspace, whatever it might be. So IT will be responsible for that infrastructure, marketing for the email marketing kit, finance for the payroll and billing engines. And all of that makes a lot of sense. But what it does mean is that there's not a single person who has a view on the health of the email that's leaving each of these platforms. And if it's true that there's this obscured vision, perhaps in the legitimate world, when we're talking about illegitimate uses of the mail, real impersonation attacks, most of our customers have no visibility of that. And so, if there's somebody sitting in Russia or China or South Africa sending mails, pretending to be coming from our customers, it's unlikely that they're going to know anything about it until something bad happens. So what are those bad things that can happen? Well, far and away, the biggest one that we see, and the one, again, that affects our customers, most often, is deposit fraud. And this is that classic example of a mail, containing an invoice being sent to a customer, but, oh, by the way, our banking details have changed. I think, most people that I talk to, if they haven't directly, been affected by one of these, they know somebody who has. So, really an acute problem experienced by organizations in South Africa today. But over and above deposit fraud, impersonation attacks are used to trick users into handing over their credentials. They leverage that trust relationship to do so. They're used to distribute not only ransomware, but malware of all varieties. And more what we're seeing is that, these kinds of attacks are starting to cause significant reputational damage. Now, if a customer of yours pays a fraudulent invoice and you go back and you ask them for the money that's rightfully owed to you, and they tell you, no, but I paid this invoice, you're going to have friction in that relationship. But if an attacker gets access to your systems by tricking a user into handing over credentials and then leaking data into the public domain, I think you'll appreciate that this can be quite significant in terms of reputational damage. And we've seen these kinds of attacks increasing in popularity, certainly over the past couple of years.
So Kieran, maybe let me just stop you there. So obviously, one of the main reasons that email is used is to have something in writing and communication between business to business, business to consumer. And we've seen a lot of people impersonating others using lookalike domains in the past. So what you're saying now is that it's actually possible to hijack that person's actual email address and actual domain and send mails as myself. So not something that looks like my email address, but actually using my email address to send a fraudulent mail.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only is it possible, but it's actually very easy to pull off. There are tools, that are designed for the right reasons with the right intentions, available in the market. You simply need a credit card to buy them. And the downside is that if you want to use those tools nefariously, I mean, they're openly available, right? So it's not only possible, Dave, it's actually really easy to pull off.
I think the scary
Yeah,
thing is, I mean, you're talking about deposit fraud. So I think we're all kind of cautious of that. Bank details have changed. We've probably got checks and balances in place, to phone and confirm. But say in my world, it's not uncommon for me to place an order for a few million rand and deliver at this address. And really, I'd have no idea if somebody had sent a mail like that until, 30 days later, someone sent me an invoice for something I didn't order. So it could actually be quite a long time before that fraudulent action happens to when it's discovered, if there's no tool to track who's sending mails on your behalf.
Absolutely, and I think one of the outcomes that's often ignored there is that the two parties end up blaming each other, the two innocent parties, right? So if there's this long lag between when the fraudulent action occurs and somebody actually finding out about it, it's you and your supplier who now have to kind of deal with the outcomes, and the attack is long gone, right? So I think those are two great points. I think let's talk a little bit about how this actually works, right?
Sure.
I think that context will help quite a lot. So it really is the result of the way that organizations today are consuming email, right? So more and more we're seeing organizations buy software as a service applications. So there's been lots of migration to the likes of Office 365. Companies are using platforms like Everlytic, like MailChimp to do email marketing, online CRMs like Salesforce, Pipedrive. These platforms are all, being consumed at an ever increasing rate. Now, that makes a lot of sense. We at Sendmarc make use of a lot of these platforms, but one of the kind of features of these platforms is that they're geographically distributed, right? They're spotted all over the world. If we just think about Office 365, for example, there's server infrastructure literally on every continent, that's got people on it. So they're heavily geographically distributed. And the second thing is that these platforms actually use impersonation in the technical sense to do the job that we want them to. So if we want MailChimp to send out a big newsletter to all of our customers, well, they have to impersonate our domain in order to do so, right? In order to send those bulk communications. Now, the problem is that attackers have the same profile. So, I called out Russia and China earlier, and really, they are the bugbear. Everyone kind of thinks of them as the obvious culprits. But the fact of the matter is that you can't say that because the mail's coming from Russia or China that it's necessarily evil. And you can't say or sent with malicious intent. And for the same reason, you can't say that a mail that comes from the US or Europe or South Africa is not so, right? So it's very difficult for these stakeholders in the middle to know who the legitimate senders are versus who the illegitimate senders are. So I think a good place to look now is kind of the existing protection that we have in place, right? And often, when we think about existing protection and the way in which protection has been approached by the industry at large for, many, many years, is that it's been focused on securing the inbound leg, right? So it's focused on protecting, my staff and everybody inside of my perimeter. Now, there's many platforms that do this, and they do a pretty good job. I'm not here to say that they don't. They absolutely do. But what they can't protect against is the outbound leg, right? So if I'm an attacker and I'm sending a mail to your supplier, Dave, and saying, hey, I want an order of X million rands worth of kit delivered to such and such an address. That mail's going from me, the attacker, to your supplier. It's not going, from me, the attacker, via your mailbox infrastructure to your supplier. And so there's nothing that this platform over here can do to protect the supplier against those kinds of attacks, right? There's nothing protecting them against that outbound leg. And what we're here to discuss, and the kind of big answer to this problem is about extending that net of protection, right? It's about protecting globally against these kinds of impersonation attacks. And the way that we do that is by utilizing this global open standard called DMARC. So what DMARC is, it's, as I mentioned, it's global, it's open, and it fundamentally gives us two core pieces of value. The first thing that it does is it allows us to control what happens to mail that doesn't come from a legitimate source. So, if I'm, an organization and I'm using Office 365 and MailChimp and Salesforce, and somebody tries to send a mail from our organization from a different platform, the DMARC record is going to say, to the receiver, don't accept that mail. And the second thing that it's going to do is going to say, hey, Mr. Receiver, every time you receive a mail from, my domain, let me know about it. And so, using that first element, control, we're able to protect against interception. But using that second element where I say, I want to know about it, I'm starting to get visibility, not only of how well or poorly my legitimate infrastructure is configured, but also whether or not anybody's using my domain for malicious purposes. So what do we actually do at Sendmarc? We provide a couple of things, and we obviously do so in partnership, with your team, Dave, at FirstNet. The first thing, and I think this is really important, is that we provide the software platform that takes, these reports sent to us by receiving servers around the world, thousands and thousands of XML reports, and turns them into something that's, real and usable by a human being, right? And the second thing that we provide, and again, in partnership with your teams, is really around professional services. So, having access to a tool that gives you, all of this great information is one thing, but knowing, what you need to do and how to do it is certainly another. And often when we talk to customers, they're facing one of two kinds of deficits. They're either, need some support in terms of capacity. They don't have enough resources to throw at this problem, or they just simply don't know how to fix this problem. And so, the professional services team at Sendmarc and at FirstNet are there to help customers get to this goal that we want them to, right? This blocking of impersonation attempts globally. So when you unlock, the power of DMARC and when you use Sendmarc, there's a couple of things that you as a customer can kind of get from it. I think the first one is quite clear. We want to stop impersonation attacks. But in order to do so, we have to make sure that the internet at large sees, your legitimate pieces of infrastructure as legitimate, right? So what we do is we do a lot of work to make sure that they're sending more authenticated, more secure email. So while we are going for this overarching goal of global impersonation protection, we're also improving the way in which each piece of infrastructure in your environment sends mails. This is all powered by this visibility. And again, this is visibility of attacks, but it's also, and perhaps more importantly, visibility of how well or poorly our legitimate stuff is configured. Our customers tend to see improvements in delivery. And the reason for this is simple, right? I said in the previous point that we get visibility of how well or poorly our legitimate stuff is configured. Because we're doing the work to make sure that those environments are properly configured, we're basically giving receivers around the world more reason to trust those mails. We know that this mail is coming from such and such an organization because they told us that the mail would come from this particular environment. And so we're more likely to route that mail into an inbox as opposed to a spam bucket because we know that it's a legitimate mail, right? This becomes a very strong tool for organizations to use in terms of compliance to their own policies, right? So consider the example of a marketing department who decides that they're going to use MailChimp. If somebody in the marketing department, prefers to use, and I'll just use another email marketing platform as an example, prefers to use Everlytic and spins up their own, account there and starts sending out mails. Well, for the first part, they're not going to be successful in sending those mails because they're going to be blocked by the DMARC record and by the DMARC policy. And secondly, we're going to know about it. So for the first time, we get, a view of what shadow IT is actually present in our organizations. And really, this entire journey is about building and strengthening, the online identity of our customers' environments.
So quite a common thing I see as well is people forwarding their business mail to maybe their Google accounts. Would it pick up something like that as well?
It would absolutely pick that up, right? So for the most part, that's a legitimate use of mail, but you'll have no understanding of whether or not that kind of activity is happening in your organization today, because it's outside of your ambit, right? So for the first time, you're going to get this kind of information as well, and you'll see, you'll be able to see how often your mail is forwarded through Google. That's often an insight, that we pick up with customers. So I want to talk a little bit to the score that you're seeing over here, the score of 5 out of 5, and what this really is a domain, what we call a domain safety score. It's a measure of how easy or difficult it is to send an impersonated email from your domain. And it's an evaluation of, some technical standards. I'm not going to get too much into that. I think, what's important to understand is that obviously a higher score is better, right? So a score of 5 out of 5 for Goldman Sachs really means that it's not possible to send a mail from Goldman Sachs. And that's obviously good for Goldman, right? It means that there's less fraud run off the back of their domain, but it also gives them a hell of a good story to tell their customers, to tell their suppliers that, hey, we're taking the steps required to protect you against these kinds of attacks. And it's not just Goldman, right? I mean, we see, the likes of Microsoft deploying DMARC for their own domain. So this has nothing to do with Office 365. This has to do with Microsoft seeing fit to publish a DMARC record for, Microsoft.com and doing the work to get to this fully protected 5 out of 5 state. And it is part of this global trend that we're seeing towards adoption. So we're seeing, legislation in the EU, in the US and Australia, compelling governmental organizations to get to this 5 out of 5 state, this fully protected state. We've even seen DMARC emerge as one of the key security controls in the Center for Internet Security's cybersecurity standard, right? So, internationally, adoption is certainly increasing in pace. But one of the beauties of the standard is that you don't have to be Goldman or Microsoft, to get this right. You don't have to have a massive IT department to stop impersonations on your domain. MLM Travel is one of our smallest customers. So they're a 2-person travel agency. They do bookings for school tours, and they were getting impersonated, right? So an attacker sent a fraudulent invoice to one of the schools, and the school actually ended up paying that invoice. Now, that's bad for both organizations, right? If you're a school or a 2-person travel agency, you can't really afford for that kind of cash to go missing. So luckily, they managed to reach out to the bank in time and get the transaction reversed. I say luckily because, if anybody's had any experience with it, you know how easily it can go wrong, and you can just simply not have, that money just goes missing. But then they reached out to us, and now they enjoy the same level of protection as a Microsoft or a Goldman Sachs, right? So whether you're a 2-person travel agency on the southern tip of Africa or $2 trillion market cap Microsoft, you can get to that same level of protection. Really, that's what we want to help customers with. So let's talk a little bit about what that process looks like, right? So, at a very high level, it breaks down into these 6 broad steps, right? And there's 2 big phases here. So in the first phase is all about gathering data. So one of the genius things that the guys who designed the DMARC standard did was that they allowed you to publish this record without it taking any strong actions, right? And that's really important because it means that you can get the visibility on how your domain's being utilized, and again, how well or poorly your legitimate stuff is configured before you switch on protection. So you can basically, start this process without breaking anything, which, if you've worked in security in any time, it can often be a blunt object, and which we can avoid that, those kinds of outcomes with DMARC. So what we encourage customers to do, and we'll talk about next steps a little bit later, but what we encourage them to do as a first step is to get a DMARC record into their DNS, right? When we publish that DMARC record, it allows us to start gathering reports on that customer domain, and we can gather all those reports and turn it into something real and actionable. We can basically produce a project plan which is going to detail exactly the steps that we need to take in order to safely move to protection. So usually what those steps entail is, hey, we need to configure such and such a platform so that the rest of the world recognizes it as legitimate. And once we've done that work in the certified senders phase, then we can start to enable protection. Now, this whole process, can is made a lot easier. Firstly, by the software that we provide at Sendmarc, but secondly, by the services. And so, when customers go through this journey with us, there's a couple of things that we tend to pick up as part of that journey. The first thing that we find is often that existing services need work, that the marketing platform isn't fully configured to send authenticated email. And that's one of the beauties of this technology, is that we pick the stuff up so we can go ahead and fix it. We often find that providers make mistakes, and this isn't to bash any providers out in the market. DMARC as a technology is as new to end user organizations as it is to service providers. And in the same breath that it's giving end user organizations visibility of how their domain is being utilized, it's giving service providers visibility of how their platforms conform to some of the standards, and we can use DMARC data to help them, ensure that when they roll out, standard A, that it is rolled out in a complete way in compliance with best practices. So we're able to work with service providers to get those changes made. We often find evidence that attacks are happening. I think that is an unfortunate truth of the reality that we live in today, but you can be proactive, and that's really what DMARC is about. It's about solving these problems before they become too heavy, and before something bad happens, before somebody fulfills a fraudulent order or pays a fraudulent invoice. So what would be my next steps in terms of recommendations to anybody watching, right? So I think the first and most important step is to test your score. So I think Dave will talk about it in a little bit, but linked beneath the video, you'll see a link where you can go and test your domain and see what your domain safety score is. If you're scoring a 3 out of 5 or less, your domain is open to impersonation and there's some work to be done, right? Right after that, and assuming that you don't have one already published, our recommendation is to get that DMARC record into your DNS so that we can start capturing those reports, right? You're going to want to, off the back of those reports, build a plan to mitigate any issues that come up in that DMARC data, and then you want to move as quickly as possible to full protection. Now, I mean, it goes without saying, and I really want people to understand that. I mean, that this, take this from whence it comes. But we find that organizations that leverage tools like Sendmarc and organizations like FirstNet are not only more likely to get to that fully protected state, so more likely to get to that 5 out of 5 state, but are more likely to do so much quicker. So organizations that we've dealt with that have tried to take on this journey by themselves haven't really been successful. And it's really important that you get to that end state, because it's only once you get to 5 out of 5 that you're actually protecting yourself and your staff and your customers against these impersonation attacks. And tools and expertise like Sendmarc and like FirstNet, they really are central in getting to that state. And that's really where we want our customers to be. So, I mean, that's pretty much it, from my side. I think, Dave, do you have any final thoughts, comments, concerns?
Maybe if you can just go back to the slide on that journey to protect. I think that's probably a good place to start. I know that when FirstNet first discovered this, we had a poor rating. We checked our own domain and was a poor rating, and within a couple of months we had a 5 out of 5, and we learned by sort of trying it out in ourselves. So what FirstNet will do for customers at no cost is that first phase of the journey. We can help you configure the DNS. You don't need to be able to do that yourself. We can assist with that. We'll enable the reporting, and after a couple of weeks or a few weeks, we'll analyze that data with you at no cost, and then we can decide whether or not we enter a commercial transaction for phase 2. That'll be up to you. It is an affordable security solution. Like you said, there's two two-user companies that have been able to afford it, so it's not unaffordable at all. And it's something we encourage everyone to do, is just check the domain score and let's take it from there. And I remember you saying once before that in the US, they've actually made this compulsory for some divisions. Can you maybe just chat a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So before I talk about that, I mean, I do want to, I'm very excited about this idea of running the 2-week POC. I think what it'll do for customers is it gives them, obvious proof of value, and it'll make all of this, all of these concepts that I've been talking about very real. So, I'm very excited that you guys are going ahead and offering that to customers, and I think it's a great way to get this rolled out to as many organizations as is possible. So yes, to talk to the US point, it's not just the US. So I did mention it briefly, but it's the US, the EU, and Australia. Governmental organizations in those territories are compelled to have a DMARC record and get to that vehicles reject stage. In Australia, they're taking it one step further, and they're saying that if you are a supplier to the Australian government, you need to have a DMARC record, or they're not going to accept mails from you. So, really, and hopefully this has come through, in the content that we've spoken through today, but really, when more organizations adopt DMARC, it creates a safer ecosystem for everyone in the world. And so that's why, we're seeing, these legislative responses out of the US, the EU, and Australia.
That's very interesting. Thanks, Kieran. I think that's all for now. We'll put the link in this video and below the video. Check your domain score and we'll take it from there.
Awesome.
Thanks very much, Kieran.
Thank you.